Well, hello, church family. What are some of your favorite stories? What books or movies speak to you most strongly? Perhaps you enjoy classic literature like Pride and Prejudice or Lord of the Rings. Maybe you resonate more with The Lion King, or you get excited about the new Avengers movies when they come out. Well, as people, we love stories, and in these stories we find meaning. Well, in the Bible, God has given us a story. It's a true story about how He created the world, how sin corrupted the world, and how Jesus came to rescue and redeem a sinful people. Those of us who follow Jesus find our ultimate meaning and significance in this story that we call the gospel. But we shouldn't just believe this story and move on. No, it's our obligation to live out the implications of this story. Now, I believe that human beings are fundamentally religious, and by this I mean that we all gravitate to stories that provide us with ultimate meaning and purpose. Now, I have friends who grew up in very conservative and often unhealthy religious families, and as adults they rebelled against that upbringing and they left the faith. But for many of them, their new political identity replaced their religious identity. Progressive politics became their new fundamentalism. They became public apologists for their new ideology. They found a new story to believe in. Now, my heart breaks for my friends who've left the church, but I am equally concerned for those of us who remain in the church. I fear that sometimes our hearts have been captured by stories that are not God's story. We encounter many of these stories in the political realm. And in the first video, I made the point that it's possible for our political identities to distort our faith. And now I want to talk a little bit about how this can happen. Now, in her book, The Liturgy of Politics, Caitlin Chess, she is actually a THM student at Dallas Theological Seminary. She says this. She says, the line between our political beliefs, our moral beliefs, and our theological beliefs is blurry, if not entirely invented. But none of our beliefs in these categories are ever content to stay in the boxes we've prescribed for them. They'll wander, bleed over, and most importantly, they will seek supremacy. Well, I believe Caitlin is absolutely right. Our political beliefs are not content to play second fiddle. As Rich Mullins puts it in his song, the stuff of earth competes for the allegiance that I owe only to the giver of all good things. We must guard ourselves against political beliefs, stories that want to rule in our lives. Now, these stories span the political spectrum. There is the story of liberation that suggests that life is essentially a battle between the oppressor and the oppressed. There's the story of humanism, which suggests that we can accomplish anything together if we just come together. There's also the story of the American dream, which says that anyone can succeed if they only try hard enough. And there's the story of Christian nationalism, which says that God favors a particular country. Well, each of these stories, they may contain elements of truth, but they also contain beliefs that contradict the gospel story. These stories contain assumptions about human nature and our purpose that just don't align with Scripture. And if we're not careful, these false ideas will make their way into our hearts. And a lot of times this happens so slowly that we don't even realize it. It happens when the Facebook algorithm keeps showing us the same type of news because it knows what we like to read. It happens when we listen to the same radio show every day on our drive home from work. It happens when we choose the same type of entertainment week after week. And before we know it, a flawed story has captured our hearts. Now, if this happens imperceptibly, if it happens slowly, how can we know if other stories outside of the gospel have captured our hearts? One of the ways that we can know is to be aware of our emotions as it relates to politics specifically. And we will explore that idea more in our next video. And I look forward to seeing you then.